Hey everybody, this is the BS Podcast Network. I'm Ben Dorst.
Steven Dominguez.
At least this show is better than pure BS.
What?
What are you? I'm Batman.
Who are you?
My name is Bond. I'm Batman.
Name's Bond. James Bond.
I'm Batman.
Bond. James Bond.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman. This is the Batman vs. James Bond show. The show covering everything related to Batman and James Bond movies. And now, here's your host, Brian Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to an all-new episode of the Batman vs. James Bond show. The name's Thomas, Brian Thomas, and I am your host. And this is the show where we discuss everything related to Batman and James Bond movies. It is great to be back. I hope all of you have had a great week. Mine was pretty good. The Olympics are finally coming to an end. And what does that mean? Why do I share that with you? Well, because that means that I finally get control of the TV, and now I get to go back to living my life of watching nothing but Batman and James Bond movies. If only that were true. Yeah, no, the reason I put that out there is just because, one, because I wanted to vent. The Olympics is a great event that happens, every 4 years. And, when your wife, is really into the Olympics, it's really hard to watch what you want. And, of course, me being, me, and I love Batman and James Bond, and I want to watch the movies no matter how many times I've watched them. I want to take control of the TV. In this case, the other half won, and she took control of the TV for the last 2 weeks. So needless to say, when she wasn't around, when the Olympics weren't on, then I kind of would sneak in a quick James Bond movie if it happened to be on TV, or I'm still trying to sort through the move, trying to find my Blu-rays and so forth. But so it's been pretty much more James Bond as Batman as opposed to Batman. But, so it's back to business. So, did you care about that? Probably not, but I just figured, like I said, I'd throw that out there. But you should care about this. A reminder that the Batman vs. James Bond show is now a part of the BS Podcast Network. You can now find my show and a whole bunch of other great shows on bspodnetwork.com. Shout out to Steven, Ben, and Devin over there from the Pure BS Podcast. Before we get things started, I'd like to remind everyone to please subscribe to the Batman vs. James Bond show on iTunes and leave a nice little review for me on there. Thank you. So, a quick disclaimer I always like to throw out before each and every show, especially for the new listeners. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. I am not a movie critic, obviously. And I am not a blogger for any movie site. I'm just a guy who lives and breathes Batman and James Bond. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's put it this way. Right over the top of my shoulder, and if you looked on my Instagram at Batman vs. Bond, you understand what I'm talking about. There's about a model, kind of like a cosplay costume of a certain character. Maybe, sometimes he dresses as a bat, maybe a 6-foot bat in Gotham. I'm talking about Batman. Yeah, I'm getting together my, putting the final touches on my cosplay costume for Batman. I have a Batman Begins costume, and like I said, if you check out my Instagram and Twitter or Facebook, you'll see I post pictures of it all the time. I'm getting ready for Baltimore Comic-Con in a couple weeks, so I'm really excited about that. I'm trying to take this costume to the next level, and I'll show you what my old costumes look like also. But besides the point, though, when I say, even James Bond, whenever I put on a suit, even whenever I put on a tie or something like that, or just kind of dress nicer, I'm like, man, is this how Sean Connery would dress? Is this how Daniel Craig or Pierce Brosnan would dress? Because I'm trying, I just admire the characters. I really do. Now, some will say I have no life, and you can join my wife on that bandwagon. But for everybody else, you do understand what I'm saying. So, having said that, let's get down to business. I must admit that I did record an episode prior to this, and I'm not talking about last week's episode. I'm talking about, by the time you're hearing this episode has been released, and the night before, actually, I had to record an episode. And, I got to thinking, one, I was extremely tired, just running low on sleep, as we all are. And I was thinking about, I was like, you know what, totally forgot about the certain person's birthday that is coming up, and I felt it was necessary to, I'm not going to be able to devote the whole episode to this person, but I do want to make sure that, we do celebrate his birthday with style, and despite the fact that he's retired, he is kind of like the godfather of, I don't know. I don't want to say Godfather. He is the almighty James Bond, okay? And if that doesn't give you a hint, then let me give you another hint. This actor has done 6 Bond films, actually 7 unofficially, within a 9-year span. Do you give up? Okay. I'm talking about Sir Sean Connery. Sir Sean Connery. Yeah, Sean Connery is celebrating his 86th birthday. I bet you didn't know that I could try to do a really bad Sean Connery accent, but I'm not going to do it throughout the whole show. But, my dear boy, if you're a money penny, I will put you over my knee, and that's how I want to celebrate my birthday. All right, I gave my best shot anyway. So, yeah, I want to talk tonight about Sean Connery, who I would define, and a lot of people would define, as the definitive James Bond. Obviously he's retired now, so let's get that out of the way now, but he gave us such a great run of Bond films. He set the template for Bond films. So that's when I would say that he's the definitive. And whenever anyone asks me who my favorite James Bond is, right now, I will probably say Daniel Craig, but I always forget about Sean Connery. And it's like, how could you forget Sean Connery, Brian? Well, let's face it that Daniel Craig right now has given us a lot of great Bond movies. Is he the best actor? That's to be determined by you guys. I'm not going to talk about that tonight, but I will say that we always have to respect the past and embrace the future. Tonight, we're going to respect the past and in a big way. I really want to focus tonight on Sean Connery and just everything that he's done for the Bond film franchise and so forth. If he isn't your favorite Bond, then, well, I'm sorry about that. For you Batman fans out there, well, go check out some James Bond movies if you haven't already. Chances are, if you are a Batman fan, you are a James Bond fan just because of what the James Bond franchise has done for movies in general. And you'll notice that I always, the comparisons are always there, but James Bond and Batman always have a lot in common. Especially if you go back and watch the Sean Connery movies, you'll understand what I'm talking about here too. So let's talk about, the first time I ever saw Sean Connery. Well, honestly, I never met the guy, obviously. I would have loved to meet him. Not that he's, I don't think that him and I would ever have a chance of crossing paths unless I make it over to where I guess he's Scottish, so I'm guessing he's probably staying at home now, kind of retired and so forth. But my first Bond, when I'm talking about my first Connery Bond movie experience, I would say it's probably going to fall between Goldfinger and Thunderball. Honestly, I want to say that it's Goldfinger, mainly because my dad had the VHS. Remember that old classic James Bond collection. Own it on VHS today. I remember looking at that, and my dad had he's the reason that I'm probably the James Bond fan that I am right now, and I probably overtake him and being the James Bond fan of the family. Still, though, I will say that, if it wasn't for him having those VHS cassettes down there, and, he had Goldfinger, and he had Thunderball, he had Diamonds Are Forever, and, if you remember all these old VHS covers for this, and if you're a younger kid, you're, like, looking at these, and it's like, okay, well, there's this guy, and, he's this very, handsome man, and he's holding this smaller gun, and there's, sometimes there's a golden girl in the back, there's, sometimes there's helicopters, sometimes there's planes, there's all kinds of things going on, there's underwater stuff, and you have no idea what you're looking at, but usually he's finely dressed in a suit, and he's in a tux. Well, 9 times out of 10, it was actually Sean Connery that was this character on this VHS, because my dad, he was the biggest Sean Connery fan, at least of the James Bond. So when we finally watched Goldfinger, at least to my recollection, I'm like, okay, well, it's a movie set in 1964, so my expectations were like, I don't know what to expect with this, because first Bond film I experienced was Goldeneye, and that's a Pierce Brosnan movie. It's set in 1995, and that's like, to me, that was what a James Bond film was. I mean, so going back and watching this, I'm like, well, this is an older movie, and I don't know how I'm going to like this. And I got to say, I loved it. And there was so many classic elements, and, it is... Goldfinger might still be one of my favorite. It is definitely one of my favorite Bond films of all time. I will also say that this sets a template for the James Bond films in the future. From then on, of like, what is James Bond famous for? Well, obviously, the Walther PPK. Well, Connery had that in Dr. No. He's famous for the vodka martini. Well, he had that in Dr. No also. What's he famous for? The tux. Dr. No once again, and throughout all his Bond movies, the white dinner jacket. Well, Goldfinger. The Rolex watch, if you want to go even with that. Well, Sean Connery once again. the Aston Martin DB5. Well, there you go, Sean Connery again. So you see how Sean Connery's kind of shaped and groomed what the James Bond is known for, and just not just us as fans, but just we see these like little elements throughout the if we see it throughout the day. I know if I see an Aston Martin, of course I get very excited. If I ever have to wear a tux, aside from the last time I did, which was my wedding, well, I sure as hell felt like Sean Connery, James Bond. I just wanted to go to the casino and have a couple martinis and then take my Bond girl home. So yeah, so Goldfinger definitely was the template, the one that probably set more the stage for me of what to expect with a Sean Connery Bond film, or Bond films in general. Thunderball, that's definitely, like I said, it could be between Goldfinger and Thunderball. So yeah, I would probably say Goldfinger is probably my first Bond film, and probably one of my favorite James Bond films and Sean Connery films. Probably the close second with that is going to be Thunderball. A lot of people have mixed feelings about Thunderball because they say like too much time was spent underwater with that. And honestly, I liked that. I really did. I loved what they did with those underwater scenes. I loved, everything about it. And I'm going to go into more in depth about this with the Sean Connery Bond movies. So I just wanted to make sure before I, ramble on too much that I make sure that I put out there what my favorite Connery Bond movies are. Anytime I was watching You Only Live Twice the other day, and I'm like, it grows on me. I'm not saying it's my favorite Connery Bond movie, but there's some elements of it that I really like. And like I said, we'll talk about this in a moment. I can tell you right off the top of my head what my least favorite Sean Connery Bond movies are. If it's not going to be Diamonds Are Forever, then it's going to be Never Say Never Again. Now, this is probably the first time you'll ever hear me say Never Again on this show. There's a reason for that. I have many reasons, as a matter of fact, but as far as a Bond film, technically it actually doesn't count because as of right now, there's 24 Bond films in the Eon Production vault. This is one that was not produced by Eon Productions. It was actually produced by Kevin McClory, who owned the rights at the time for Spectre and the characters that were in this movie. So he went off on his own away from Cubby Broccoli, and like I said, he owned the rights along with Ian Fleming had those rights to a point, but it was still Kevin McClory who actually controlled it up until about I guess 3 or 4 years ago, as a matter of fact. That's why we have Spectre now. Besides the point, though, everything, I was never a fan of Kevin McClory, so you could probably say, well, Brian, why do you love Thunderball so much? Because McClory wrote it and, he produced it. True, but that was a different kind of, that was still more in the classic elements that had that, Harry Saltzman, Cubby Broccoli panache to it, I guess you could say. And it was still Eon Productions. But to go off and make your own Bond film, and which is easily a remake of Thunderball, poorly done, and to kind of just give like a FU to Eon Productions, I really I take offense to that in a way. Even I'm sure the family did also, but like I said, Never Say Never Again, like I said, we'll get into that also. But so as a matter of fact, why don't we just hop right into it? My favorite Sean Connery Bond moments, some things I want to talk about if we're going to break this down into movies. Let's start with number one right now, Dr. No. Some of these scenes in here, like I said, if we're talking about movies that set a template, not just for James Bond, but for action movies and spy movies in general, Dr. No was definitely the one that kind of set that staple of what a Bond movie could be, and it just kept getting better from there on. We're introduced to James Bond, and it's not even on his first mission, and how they introduce James Bond, it's really, it's iconic, and, it might be one of the best moments on screen ever in movie history, at least in my opinion. Well, how do you introduce the world's greatest spy? Well, he's in a casino, and he's, gambling against this woman, Sylvia Trench, and you don't see his face at first, and they're playing cards, and then all of a sudden, and the lady makes the comment, or Sylvia Trench makes the comment, "I admire your luck, Mr. Bond. James Bond." And he lights the cigarette, and he has just this classiness to him, and it's just like, oh my god, it's just like, what guy did not want to be James Bond at that time? I mean, I'm speaking theoretically anyway, or what female could not be attracted to that character? Just how, his, not just class, but how, just his presence on screen, just how he did that. He was cocky, he was very sure of himself, and very handsome, but he's very tough at the same time, and he wasn't smiling, he was just kind of he had that swagger to him, and I love every moment of that. And, it's just like, this is how James Bond rolls. He's at a casino at at 2-3 a.m. in the morning, and he's playing cards, and he just gets a woman's phone number and so forth, and ends up meeting up with her later. Now, I'm not saying that's what every guy or every woman probably wants, though, but on screen for something like this set in 1962, this was quite a scene. Other things on here with Dr. No that I really love, I mean, just how his interaction with M, going back to 3 a.m. Now, 007, it's 3 a.m. When do you ever sleep? Never on the phone's time, sir. And, that his interaction with Moneypenny in there. And, I loved just how, M gave him hell about carrying. He's like, that damn Beretta. And you see the introduction to the Walther PPK, which is still to this day, all the way in 2016, the chosen gun by 007. Still carried even by Daniel Craig. As you go through, I don't want to break down all of Dr. No, but I just wanted to give some highlights of what, more of the Sean Connery of, anyway. When he flies down to Jamaica and he feels like he thought he was getting tailed by somebody, which he was. He thought it was the villain, but it ends up being that his driver is the villain. And, the driver tries to lose the tail. They pull it aside, and, what does Sean Connery do? Well, he pulls out his gun and puts it back in the back of the neck of the driver. And he's like, hands up, I'm a very nervous passenger. And, very bad Sean Connery impression. I do apologize. However, though, you see what I'm going with this. And then, he gets the guy out of the car. The driver thinks he can pull a fast one on 007. And Sean Connery just shows off his fighting skills, flips the guy, and just gives him this big deck and just knocks him the F out. And it was just a great scene showing, okay, well, Sean Connery's not just all just, wearing a suit and, carries a gun. He can handle himself physically. A great moment for James Bond, just proving, how physically, how, capable he is. And he doesn't always need the gadgets. Other scenes in here that definitely prove just how, that swagger of Sean Connery's James Bond is, when it was what's his name's secretary. The name escapes me, Professor Dent's secretary. And, he ends up going to her place and tricks her into, staying the night or having a nightcap, shall we say. And, he ends up, having her arrested and taken away, and he stays at her place. He arranges the bed just enough to make it look like he's sleeping there, because he knows Professor Dent's going to obviously come to, or maybe it's going to be somebody coming to, kill him. And, he ends up playing, a little bit of solitaire. He, has a drink. He lights a cigarette. Lights are off and so forth. He's sitting on the chair. And then all of a sudden you see Professor Dent sneak in. He shoots at the bed, and, then Dent's out of ammo. And Sean Connery pulls this great line. He said, "That's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6. Pow. And he pops him a couple times, and it's just like, and then he takes off the silencer off there, or the compressor, and he just kind of lightly blows on it, and then he just kind of goes back to what he's doing. It's just like, oh my God, this is just, even now thinking about it right now, I want to go back and watch Dr. No, because the more I think about it, the more I love this film. Not that I didn't love it before. Let's go with James Bond meeting Honey Rider. Now, if there was ever a classic Bond girl scene, and believe me, we'll be doing a Bond girl and Bond girl, Batman girls, girls of Batman and James Bond. We'll be doing that eventually, anyway, down the road. But this scene is really cool because you have Honey Rider singing, coming out of the ocean in her classic white bikini. And what does James Bond do? Well, guess what, folks? James Bond can sing. That's right. Sean Connery can sing a few tunes. And he starts singing, "Underneath the Mango Tree." And it's just like, oh. And of course, it shocks Honey Rider. It's like, James Bond? Who is that guy? He can actually sing and so forth. But it was just a great moment in there because she's like, "Who are you?" It's like, "Oh, I'm just looking." And that whole quote in there. And it's just another classic element of James Bond. Just, he can, not only can he hold his own, physically, but when it comes to the ladies, he always finds a way. And another scene in this movie with Dr. No is obviously with Dr. No at the dinner scene. And I've mentioned it many times before when I was talking villains is, Dr. No is kind of explaining himself and thinking that he's going to impress, James Bond. And James Bond, of course, is not impressed at all. He's like, "World domination, shame dream." And, it just how James Bond, it's like, he has that attitude, just like, okay, you're another just bad guy who thinks he can, rule the world, and I've seen this kind of stuff before, and you don't intimidate me, and so forth, and that's the way it is, and I'm still going to win. And I love that charisma of Sean Connery's James Bond. Just like I said, it almost gets to the point of being cocky, like saying, yeah, I know I'm James Bond, I know I'm going to win, I had that reputation. It might be a little tough, but I'm still going to get you. So let's move on to From Russia with Love here. Classic moments with this with Sean Connery. And like I said, it's not always about the gadgets, but then sometimes you need to have a gadget or two. So enter Desmond Llewellyn's Q. So this is actually like the first time that we see James Bond and Desmond Llewellyn's Q. We did see kind of Major Bothrow on Dr. No, but that's really, they didn't never officially called him Q. But this is where he gets the suitcase with the sniper rifle in it and the gold sovereigns and, the way to lock it and so forth. And it was just, like I said, I don't want to go into too much of it, but it was, once again, it was just a great interaction with this. The chemistry was there right away. I love the sniper scene that they had with this in this movie. It was with Karim Bey, and this was right after the gypsy scene, and Spectre. It was one of the henchmen. Ended up shooting Karim Bey in the I think it was like the arm or something like that, and Karim Bey wanted to get revenge on him because of whatever it was at the time. Sorry, my mind's drawing a blank right now. But, ends up being that Bond lets him take the shot with the sniper rifle, and he just kind of stands there, and Karim Bey holds the rifle right over top of his shoulder just so he gets better aim, and then they shoot it. You see the green night vision, and the lady's mouth open up, and that's when Karim Bey shoots the bad guy, and then he falls out and onto the ground. And then Bond pulls this classic quote, say, should have kept your mouth shut. And it was, I love it every time I see that scene. Probably one of my favorite scenes in there. The other scene in here that always stands out for me is, when Red Grant and Bond are on the train near the finale of the movie, and it's they had dinner together, but then Bond picks up obviously who this guy is, that he's not who he says he is, and that he's obviously of Spectre. And Red Grant knows who James Bond is, but at the same time he's not intimidated by him in the slightest bit. And what I like about this is, and I've mentioned this before, is that Karim Bey gets him trapped in the room after he's killed Karim Bey, and he has James Bond get down on his knees, and he's like, "Until you kiss my feet," something along those lines, and keeps calling him old man. And of course, James Bond and him get in a fight, and he's like, James Bond uses the quote once again back at him, saying "old man." And, like I said, great scene in there. Like I said, I haven't watched From Russia with Love in a long time. That's why I'm a little rusty with that. One I'm not rusty with is obviously Goldfinger, because I could probably recite that movie by heart if I really tried hard enough. This scene with it, let's open it up with this scene. Even the pre-title sequence, it's set, it's with James Bond. He's blowing up the drug factory, and he switches out of the wetsuit, and he puts on his white dinner jacket, the classic white dinner jacket. He puts on the red flower, right into his jacket, and he smells it and then puts it in there. He goes into the club when the girl's dancing in the bar and so forth. He checks his Rolex, and then all of a sudden he lights the lighter just in time. And what happens? But the bomb that he had set that goes off, and it's just like, and he just kind of gives this like, well, what's going on here kind of look. And it's like, oh, wow, I love this. This is perfect. Could you see any other James or Bond actor doing that? I don't think so. Honestly, I couldn't. I mean, Daniel Craig, with all due respect to him, I don't know if he could pull it off. Pierce Brosnan, maybe. Roger Moore, no, not at all. And even George Lazenby, no, I don't think so either. So, and this was definitely, I don't know if Sean Connery, how much sometimes he improvised with this, but I definitely say that even if it wasn't improvised, it was just written perfectly well, and he knocked it out of the park with this. Another scene was in Goldfinger was the classic gin rummy scene. So it's the first time he kind of has like an interaction with Goldfinger, and he meets Joe Masterson, and of course he sneaks into Goldfinger's room, into his penthouse or whatever. He sees Joe Masterson kind of how do I say this? She is scantily clad in a black bikini, kind of laying down, and she's speaking in the microphone, and it's James Bond being James Bond. He kind of checks her out and then says, the name's Bond, James Bond, and just he said, "Tell me, Joe, why does he do it?" And just the kind of interaction that he had with her, and then all of a sudden he decides to toy with Goldfinger, and he's like, "No, listen here, Goldfinger," and then I don't want to report you to the Miami PD, so something along those lines. And I said I knew this by heart, but of course, either it's the end of the day or that I need to go back and rewatch this, and I'm just looking for an excuse. So, but the point I'm going with this is the gin rummy scene that he had with this is that when he gets Goldfinger so mad because Goldfinger actually loses at this game, and what does Goldfinger do? He gets so pissed off that he ends up breaking the pencil in half and so forth, and he's like, over and out. And then all of a sudden what happens? Well, it's time to have a date night, shall we say. See, I keep it clean. I want to keep it PG-13 for the younger listeners out there, but we'll just say, and remember, these movies, that's another thing I want to mention before I forget, is that these movies were PG. Now, this is the rating system at the time. There was either G, PG, or rated R. And, there was no PG-13. Looking back on this, yeah, sure, a PG rating, normally it's for more animated, lighter-hearted movies and so forth, but these are PG-13 movies. If they had to go back and re-rate these are more kind of adult content stuff. So while they might not be revealing, they do give you that idea saying, okay, well, this is what James Bond just did. Well, we'll show him, and he's with a scantily clad female, and, they're making out in bed, but we're just going to give you that idea of what just happened. So you get the picture of what I'm saying with that. So, once again, obviously, his interaction with Odd Job in there, that was really, everything, man is Odd Job. I thought you always took your hat off to a lady. And the Q briefing scene in this, what a great scene this was. This is the staple or the main Q scene, or probably the best Q scene we've ever had before, and it was all the way set back in 1964. That's how good it was. The introduction to the Q Labs itself. The introduction to the Aston Martin DB5, eject a seat, you're joking. I never joke about my work, 007. And just that interaction, like I said, just the interaction that they had, just the chemistry that he had. He was, while he was cocky and while he was always very charismatic, he also had kind of that boyish charm. There you go. He had a boyish charm. He kind of was like the little kid who would go into dad's, office and play with the toys. And of course, Q got mad with him every single time. And that's what made it so much better. The golf scene, let's jump to that. You never thought about like James Bond playing golf. I mean, we haven't seen that probably in a very long time, but there was actually a James Bond golf scene. This is, like I said, once again, it's not James Bond having to use gadgets. It's not action related and so forth. It's a game. Is the good guy versus the bad guy, and just a very gentleman's game of golf. And, Goldfinger thinks he's got him, but he doesn't, obviously, because, James Bond has, as he says, let's have a little fun with Mr. Goldfinger. And, he ends up switching the balls, and, it ends up just being just classic. I know I keep overusing this word, but it truly is classic. The Aston Martin DB5 chase that was in there, but once again, awesome. Another classic scene. See, I did it again. Another scene in here that stands by far the test of time is the Goldfinger laser. Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. And, how many times, will you ever hear that, reference to? At least I know to this day, even if you don't know James Bond, even if, somebody isn't a fan, I guarantee you, if you mention those quotes in there, that they will know what James Bond is just because of that scene alone. Let's move on to Thunderball here. The pre-title sequence, once again, the jetpack in here. I love the jetpack. I really do. I wish that they could have had more scenes with that, but because it was, I guess, such a prototype at the time, they could only do so much with it. It was probably so expensive, but seeing him, after he ends up getting the bad guy at the very beginning and so forth, and he's trying to escape the henchman. He gets up to the roof, he puts on this jetpack, and to see that for the first time, I don't know like what the kids were thinking about when they first saw that all the way back in 1965, but it's like, oh, wow, this is just, when they say, James, look up, look down. Well, look up, because James Bond is wearing a jetpack. And, Sean Connery did the best that he could with, trying to mimic about actually if he were in a jetpack. I think he pulled it off pretty nicely. I still love that scene, one of the better James Bond scenes overall. Another scene in here that I really liked is the Felix Leiter scene. And, there's been lots of Felix Leiters. And, like I said, when I talk about the Allies, which I will eventually get to as the Allies episode, I know I tease a lot, but I really will get to this. There's this character, Felix Leiter, that's played in this movie Thunderball. Felix is kind of not sneaking up on 007, but, James Bond is aware that there's a henchman in his bedroom, in his hotel room, and, Felix Leiter's coming he knocks on the door, visits, and what does James Bond do? Well, he punches him right in the gut, because that's what everybody should do to one of their best friends and allies. You just punch him, just give him a nice courteous punch in the gut. And he's like, well, hello, ooh, like that, and just punches him, and James Bond says, shh, like this, and then he turns on the hot water into the shower, and the henchman jumps out. And then James Bond is having some fun with him, saying, go back to the big fish and tell him the little one got away, and so forth. And, he just says, move. And then the henchman runs away, and so forth. And like I said, it's just great. Another great scene in here is with James Bond, and it's with Fiona Volpe. I always get that name incorrect. But, she picks him up as James Bond was just trying to sneak around Largo's boat, and he runs up on the beach in the middle of the nighttime. Mustang picks him up, and it ends up being, of course, this Spectre agent, Fiona Volpe. And she ends up going extremely, extremely fast. And it's one of the very few times that you actually see James Bond get nervous. And Sean Connery portrayed this so well. And then, he's holding on for dear life. She's going at least like a $120 down this like very narrow street down by the beach in the Bahamas and so forth. And then they stop at the hotel, and she's like, "You look nervous, Mr. Bond." Something along those lines, like, "Well, some men just don't like to be taken for a ride." And once again, love that scene. And then they end up having their little love scene and so forth. And she's obviously, a little rough to say the least. And, they're getting dressed for the carnival, and he's putting on his suit. She's putting on her dress. And after, James Bond, obviously, Fiona already knew who he was, and James Bond pretty much knew who she was and so forth. But they make it official. The henchmen show up and so forth. And then James Bond makes this really great quote. He says, "My dear girl, don't flatter yourself. What I did this evening was for Queen and Country. You don't think I took any pleasure out of it?" Something along those lines anyway. And she just has this, "Oh, you SOB, I can't believe you just said that. That is so uncalled for." But it just shows that how James Bond will do what he has to do. And it just the swagger that James Bond, or the Sean Connery James Bond had, just saying, okay, well, I did what I had to, and, too bad, but you meant nothing to me. And loved it. Loved every minute of it. Where he did kind of show of more of a softer side, so to speak, is when he was on the beach with Domino, and when he sucks the poison out of her foot. Wow. I don't know what woman wasn't turned on. I can say I was turned on by that, because I was like, Sean Connery sucking poison out of my foot. Yeah, okay. And then, they have the guy sneaking up with one of the main henchmen sneaking up, and Domino says, "He's over there." And then he shoots the spear gun right into him, into the tree. He's like, "I think you got the point." And once again, that's Sean Connery being Sean Connery. He's got his wafer sunglasses on. He's just laying on the beach with a beautiful goddess girl, and he just maintains calmness and composure and just takes out the bad guy. Loved it. Let's move on here with You Only Live Twice. It was an interesting James Bond because they, how they started off and so forth. But I loved when right after they faked his death, that they pick up the body that was buried at sea. They bring him onto the submarine. They open it up and so forth. And Sean Connery wakes up and he says, "Permission to come aboard, sir." And he's like, "Granted." And I just loved it. It's just like he still has that. Sean Connery, obviously by that time, he had he nailed it. I mean, he did from the very beginning, but that's when he started to almost, I would say, lighten up just a little bit. It seemed like he was starting to have a little bit more fun with it in a way. He always took it very seriously, but it just, those not snarky, those sarcastic comments, and just like I said, I love those kind of comments that he had in there. All right, let's skip to when James Bond is in Japan, out of his elements, obviously more fish out of water this time. He's the henchman was carrying him back, thinking that it was actually another henchman and so forth. And they they go into the Asado building. And then James Bond wakes up the bad guy pulls off the mask off James Bond and he's like, good evening. And then gets into the fight. And obviously he wins because it's just a minor henchman. And then, he goes to the bar, pours a glass of vodka in there, which of course James Bond loves, and he's like, cheers. And then he drinks it, and then he's just like, ugh. He's like, Siamese vodka. And it's just, like I said, just another one of those quotes that he had in there. It can sometimes be forgotten. This is obviously another one too. He's with number, oh my goodness, I want to say it was number 4. I can never remember her name in there, but she was one of the villainesses in here that was working also with Asado, and Blofeld ended up killing her and feeding her to the piranhas. But before all that, James Bond thinks he can trick her into saying, "Oh, let's run away to England together," and so forth, and then he takes the torture knife and cuts off the straps of her dress, and he says, "Oh, the things I do for England." And once again, I'll keep using it. Classic James Bond. Another great scene in here is when James Bond is with Tiger Tanaka, and they're off at Tiger's home or his mansion, wherever his hidden fortress, and Tiger makes the comments like, "It's time for you to take your first civilized bath." And it was just, they're having this conversation about Spectre and so forth, trying to figure out what's going on with the missing missile rocket. And it was just, James Bond, he was getting pampered by all these lovelies, and he's got his hairy chest and so forth, and he just maintains his calmness and composure and his smooth, cool just ways, and I loved it. Let's move into Diamonds Are Forever. I'll say once again, not my favorite Bond film by any stretch of the means, but I did like some parts of it. I liked how they brought back Sean Connery, and when I say this, how they reintroduced him in the pre-title sequence. It started off him just trying to pretty much punching a couple guys at the very beginning. He ends up seeing Marie at the very beginning, and she's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, "My name is Bond, James Bond." And he's got his probably 7th toupee on by then and so forth. And he's aged a little bit, but he's still, it's like, okay, James Bond is back. It's nice to see him back on screen and so forth. A scene that my friend and I always talk about, and it's still probably one of my favorite scenes, maybe in a James Bond movie, is when he finds out that Blofeld is alive. He's in the Willard White casino hotel, and they're up in the penthouse. And what happens is, there ends up being a double, because it looks like Willard White, there's two Blofelds walking around in the room, and there's 2 cats. And James Bond ends up kicking one of the cats and shoots one of the Blofelds in the head. And Blofeld, it didn't end up being the right one, obviously. And that's when Blofeld makes the comment saying, "Right idea, Mr. Bond, but wrong pushy." And we always get a chuckle out of that, and I think you guys will too. Like I said, if you haven't seen any of these movies, I'm sorry to spoil them for you, but they have been out for over 30, almost 40 years now. But to say the least, that's just classic James Bond with his little quirky remarks and so forth. And like I said, I love him. I can never get enough of him. Even one when he was buried into the pipeline in the desert right outside of Vegas, and the guys find him, and James Bond pops out of the little chute there and so forth, and the construction workers are looking at him like, "What's the guy with the tux doing here?" And James Bond makes the quote in there saying, "I seem to be walking my rat and I lost my way." And like I said, it's just another one of those quotes. And I won't use the word on there again, but you know where I'm going with that. Let's finish it up with Never Say Never Again. Yeah, the unofficial James Bond, the one I don't always like mentioning, but for the sake of, celebrating this man's birthday, I will mention that I did like some key elements of it. I did like that we saw an older James Bond. Just saying, okay, well, it's the James Bond we knew and we loved, and it's still that same character, but, well, he's aged now, and they did address that too, because Sean Connery wasn't quite in his, mid to late 30s like he was when he first started off. Now he's like almost in his 50s, and he could have been 60, actually, maybe his early 60. I do apologize. I have to look up that one time. And even when he's in the rehab clinic, his fighting style, he's just, he's an older man, more grayer. He's fighting this oversized, muscled guy in there. And I like the fight in there that they had, and especially how it ended off, because you have James Bond. He knows he's not going to be able to, I'll fight this guy, so he's going to have to kind of trick him and so forth, and even if it means throwing stuff at him, and it ended up being him throwing a jar of his urine sample in there, and it burns the guy's face, and the guy gets beakers into his back and ends up killing him. I really like that scene, just showing that, once again, that you have an older James Bond, and sometimes, it's not up to the gadgets, but sometimes he's just got to do whatever it takes. I love the scene in there, not just because it's Kim Basinger, because I'm a big Kim Basinger fan. Obviously, a Batman reference there too. She is getting massage when she's in the Bahamas, and like I said, this is kind of like, it is a remake of Thunderball. It's just a new domino. He's giving her the massage, and I just like how he even at that age, and it's just saying, okay, he's still smooth with the ladies. He still has his ways. There was a good bike chase in there, and I liked how they ended it off, where he's like, I'm retired, I'm not coming back, and Kim Basinger's like, never, and he's like, and he just kind of gives that wink to the screen and so forth, and that was kind of like an inside joke from what I understand. I think Sean Connery actually said that to his wife, saying, never say never again, or she said it to him about him coming back to play the role, and that's where they got the idea of the name. Another one that somebody mentioned on social media was Odd Job getting shocked. Of course, if you're in Fort Knox, going back to Goldfinger, that was definitely a classic moment in there too. I know there's a whole bunch of definite classic Sean Connery James Bond sequences in there and so forth. A little bit of Sean Connery trivia also. It ends up being that his favorite Bond film is actually From Russia with Love. How about that? It also turned out that Ian Fleming originally didn't like Bond or Sean Connery being cast as James Bond for Dr. No. And get this, it's because he felt he was too unrefined. The actor whom Fleming embodied Bond in Fleming's mind was Cary Grant. Eventually, Fleming later changed his mind, admitted that he really was, that Sean Connery was ideally cast for the role. A couple other things. How Sean Connery actually won the role of James Bond was when producer Albert R. Broccoli was attending a screening of Sean's called Darby O'Gill and the Little People. And Broccoli was very impressed from what he saw, especially with the fist fight that Sean Connery had at the climax of the film. And Cubby later had his wife, writer Dana Broccoli, see the film, and she confirmed his sex appeal. Well, I mean, like I said, when you see Sean Connery at his prime, sure, he might have had the toupee on, but no matter what though, he always had that look, the dark hair, the close shave, the tux, or anytime he was in a suit. Producers Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli, the original producers who cast him, liked how big and tough he was and how he moved, and they say he would move so gracefully, he was almost like a cat. Yeah, I could definitely see that. He is the only Bond actor to actually appear in both Eon productions and non-Eon productions of a James Bond movie. Like I said, once again, when we say he starred in officially 6 James Bond films, that's under the Eon Productions. When Never Say Never Again came out, that was non-Eon Productions. So that's why it's always called the Forgotten Bond film. Trivia fact there. And finally, his performance as James Bond in 007 films is ranked on Premiere Magazine's 100 Greatest Movie Characters of All Time. So to that I say, happy birthday, many happy returns, Sean Connery. Thank you for everything that you gave to this James Bond film franchise. I don't know if there's ever going to be an actor that can, like I said, sure, Daniel Craig is an amazing Bond actor. I love what he's done with the character. However, Sean Connery still is the definitive James Bond, and I can always argue that. So for you Batman fans, if you've never really ever checked out a Sean Connery James Bond movie, and you've more watched the new ones, please go back and watch the old ones. Like I say, respect the past, and not just because of that, because these movies, they really hold up. They really do. And like I said, you'll see a lot of influence of Batman movies in there also. So let's move on here really, really quick. I'm not going to be able to get to everything I wanted to. I did want to mention that Suicide Squad has hit $500 million, came in number 3 at the box office again, bringing in $20.7 million this weekend. It's looking pretty good overall for Suicide Squad. It might not be like the big hit that they wanted for Warner Brothers, but overall, it was awesome. Something else I wanted to mention on here, speaking of best of movies, The Dark Knight was actually voted the best movie on Twitter. How about this? So there was a Twitter poll that happened last week, and it was used by hashtag Fav7Films, FAV7 Films, and what you would do is you would go online and you would vote for your favorite movie of all time. Well, guess who ended up coming in number 1? Well, it was Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, and it was actually mentioned 5,056 times on Twitter. So I gotta say, I was pretty shocked by that. Not just because, I think it's probably one of the better Batman films, but to say it's one of the best movies of all time. And as a Batman fan, I'm like, wow, that's amazing that, a movie, it came out 8 years ago. It definitely is a masterpiece. It maybe has one little minor flaw in there, and I will talk about that another time. But to say, after all those other movies that are out there, especially all the Star Wars fans that are out there right now, if you want to say Lord of the Rings, Back to the Future, whatever kind of movie, The Godfather, even Shawshank Redemption, Pulp Fiction, it beat out all those movies, and not by just a small margin. It really beat them out pretty well. So, that brings me to another point that I want to mention, that this November, I'm going to be doing a competition on here, and it's going to be voted on by you guys, the listeners, and on social media, we will be deciding on who is the best James Bond. Well, I know we just talked about that, but that's up to you guys. So I'm going to do 2 different things: the best Batman actor, best James Bond actor, voted by you guys, and the best Batman film and the best James Bond film. And we're going to have a final final duo of which one comes out on top. Is it going to be Batman or James Bond? Because you know what, damn it, this is the Batman versus James Bond show, and that needs to be decided this 2016. So let's move into some other birthdays and anniversaries. Like I said, I got to kind of rush this at the very end, but I do apologize. So other birthdays this week is Toshiro Suga, who's played Chang in Moonraker, celebrates her birthday on August 22nd. For those of you that have seen Moonraker, and those of you that haven't, first of all, go see Moonraker. If you wanted just a nice kind of popcorn, because it's kind of a fun James Bond film, I would say check out Moonraker. It doesn't take itself seriously. It's James Bond in space. Need I say more? Chang played the henchman for Drax in there. I think one of the most memorable scenes that 2 memorable scenes that I can think of the top of my head is one where, in the simulator, James Bond is trying out at Drax's palace, and, Chang just cranks up the notches to, whatever Mach speed, the highest Mach speed. Then you have Roger Moore going around in circles, the skin's just going all the way back to the back of his face and so forth. And he's trying to hit the chicken switch, and then he takes his wristwatch, the Q gave him, and shoots one of the darts, and it stops it. I really like that scene after that. There was also a scene when they're kind of in this the top of this building. There's the stained glass fight versus Chang and James Bond. James Bond obviously beats Chang, knocks him out the window. Chang falls into this piano, and Roger Moore pulls one of these, and I say classic again, with these quotes saying, "Play it again, Sam." And that's probably one of my favorite parts of the movie, actually. Another birthday on August 22nd is Rick Yoon. He played Zhao in Die Another Day. Another henchman, and, I think he's an underrated henchman, if that. For all the bad things that everybody has to say about Die Another Day, I can honestly say I would not say Rick Yoon is one of them. As a matter of fact, I would say he's probably one of the highlights of the film. I love how him and James Bond, they just had that, I'm going to kick your ass kind of attitude. And Pierce Brosnan definitely, physically, he probably couldn't keep up with Rick Yoon, even though he did try. Just the interaction they had in the demilitarized zone when they're walking, James Bond's in his beard and the shackles, and so is Zhao with now the diamonds in the face that James Bond is responsible for. And Pierce Brosnan's James Bond makes this comment, says, "Zhao, I'm being traded for you. Your time will come." And Zhao's like, not as soon as yours. And it's just like, okay, I'm looking forward to this. And it ends up resulting in a really fun car chase that they have in there. So like I said, check out Die Another Day. I enjoy that movie. I can still go back and enjoy it. Like I said, with all the flaws and everything crap that it gets, I think it's some people times it doesn't deserve all the bashing that it gets. But moving on here, Akiko Wakabashi celebrates a birthday on August 26th. Sorry if I butchered that name. She played Aki in You Only Live Twice. She was what we call as the second Bond girl of the movie. We thought she was probably going to be the main one in there, but unfortunately she ended up dying. Spoiler alert. I liked how the interaction that she had with James Bond in there. She knew she respected him. At the same time, though, she did kind of trick him a few times, or at least one time off the top of my head, where James Bond thought that she was probably on the Spectre side. He's chasing her down like through this kind of like this, I would say it's kind of like a metro rail system or so forth, or kind of like a shopping center, and he thinks he has her, and she just stops, and all of a sudden he starts walking towards her, and he falls down the chute, and that's when he ends up meeting Tiger. I like the little white convertible that she drives in there, and it's super fast. And they have a cool chase sequence through Japan and so forth. I thought she was overall a pretty good Bond girl, but I think that Barbara Brock might take the cake for one of my more favorite Bond girls. She celebrates a birthday on August 27th. She played Major Anya Musava in The Spy Who Loved Me. When you think Bond girl, like I said, I'm going to keep teasing this whenever I do my Bond Batman Girls episode. Barbara Brock would definitely come up in at least the top. I would put her at least in the top 10, maybe even top 5 Bond girls. It's just something about her. I mean, there's always a different kind of Bond girl out there. Sometimes they fall in the category of damsels in distress. Sometimes they fall into, okay, well, we're going to try to have the Bond girl match 007. Well, in this case, this is one of the few times, if maybe only times, that it actually worked. She played Triple X in The Spy Who Loved Me, and she was the Russian secret agent, and she was like a James Bond to a point. She still had, she had obviously the feelings for Roger Moore's 007, and it showed. And that was maybe her weakness as a spy. But overall, though, she was a gorgeous woman. She is a gorgeous woman, especially at her prime there during that time. The sequences that she even when she's driving the van, and they're fighting Jaws and they're trying to escape, and Jaws is on the back of the van. She backs it up into the construction, and she says, "Shaken, not stirred." And it's like, okay, you won me over a long time ago, but now I just love you. So Barbara Brock, definitely one of the definitive Bond girls. All right, so let's finish it up with Versus, the final part of the show where we compare movies of the Batman or James Bond universes versus other franchises in the same wheelhouse. So we continued the James Bond versus Batman. I gotta say, I'm loving this. I don't know if you guys are. I would like some feedback on this, obviously. But I do know that none of you could come to a decision on whether who the clear winner was going to be. It ended up being, for the first time ever in Versus history, it was a tie. It was, to refresh your memory, GoldenEye versus Batman 1989. Well, like I said, it was split. So, yeah, at least I wasn't alone in this, and I know exactly how you feel because I love both of these movies so much. They were both the first of each franchise for me. Like I said, GoldenEye is my first James Bond movie. Batman 89 is my first Batman movie, and they always hold a special place in my heart because of, like I said, it's just watching these movies. And if you're, obviously if you're a fan of these franchises, you remember the first one of these movies that you've seen, especially if you're a fan of both. And at least for me, I mean, it's just, I can go back. GoldenEye will always be one of my favorite James Bond movies, and whether it holds up 20 years from now, 40 years from now, who knows? Pierce Brosnan will always be my James Bond. Same for Batman 1989. Will it always hold up? Maybe, maybe not. I have no idea. But I will always say that Michael Keaton will be my Batman, Bruce Wayne. Just something about these movies that I love. So, and, I'm going to be right there with you. I can't pick a clear winner because I really have no idea. I might lean just a little bit towards Batman 89, just because that was the first I saw out of the two. And maybe that's probably why I'm such a big Batman fan right now. But yeah, that's maybe that's one we'll have to revisit later in the future. Maybe you guys can give me a definitive answer on that. So this week's versus, I'm going to make it even harder for you. Once again, it is going to be Batman Returns versus License to Kill. So here we go again. Michael Keaton's Batman does return. See what I did there? He's going to be battling it out versus the Penguin versus Catwoman. And then you have License to Kill, which is not quite a sequel, but it's Timothy Dalton's second outing as James Bond. The reason I picked these two is because it has the more of a darker tone. They're always, I don't want to say criticized for being dark, but sometimes they do get a lot of slack or they do get a lot of crap for being too dark and for taking in the franchise in that kind of a direction. Some people loved it like me. Some people not so much. So I really want to hear what you guys have to say about this. Vote at Batman versus Bond. I'll put the Twitter poll up by the time you listen to this, and make sure you cast your vote. So, that about wraps it up for this episode of the Batman vs. James Bond show. Please subscribe on iTunes and rate it 5 stars and leave a nice little review for me on there. Thank you. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Batman vs. Bond, and be sure to like the Batman vs. James Bond Facebook page. As I mentioned at the top of the show, now you can find the show on BS Podcast Network. Like I said, make sure that you check out Pure BS Podcast, hosted by Steven and Ben on there. They host a really fun show on there, and they do talk a little bit about Batman from time to time. So, like James Bond, I will return. Until next time, I'm Brian Thomas. Thanks for listening, and have a great week, everyone. Peace out.